Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everyone, it's Debbie Potts, the host of the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where I try to bring different guests to you to talk about how you can be fit and healthy from the inside and out. As you may know, if you've been listening a long time, as we've had this podcast, 10 years already, with being healthy isn't just exercising more and being fit on the outside. Your exterior may look good, but what's going on inside you don't know unless you investigate running functional lab tests or correlate how you feel with your kind of a metabolic typing diet report I give people, and I can send you one for free. Just as a great chart to go, okay, do I feel gassy? Do I feel bloated? Do I have burping? Do I have bloated belly after I eat? Or do you feel energized and happy and satisfied and no hunger for hours after you eat? Metabolic typing, individuality, bioindividuality with what we eat is really important part to look at. So just because you exercise and you are fit, or maybe you're struggling with getting the desired performance gains that you should be getting or expect to get from your training program. I know from my own experience, since my fitness level, I was, racing my best, setting PRs in 2012 and all my races, hitting my goals, starting with new goals in 2013, and I have been a disaster since, and finally regaining my health. I've often the past 8 years taken one step forward, 2 steps back. But a lot of it was not changing my way of life and slowing down and changing my entire world around last year and really getting the right functional lab test and looking at 3 to 5 lab tests so I can see the whole picture of what's going on the inside out. But also, as I say every show, that we need to work on improving our lifestyle habits. So just exercising every day, lifting weights is important. Doing your cardio training, if you're training for events, is essential, but really lifting weights, walking in the morning, getting that sunlight, watching the sunset, moving throughout the day, do some mobility drills throughout the day, not sitting more than an hour. That stuff's the important part. So we talk about performance gains, burning fat, but also looking at the aging process, longevity. How do you want to live your life, your second half of your life? How do you want to be feeling and moving when you're age 70, 80? Do you want to be traveling the world, or do you want to be totally immobile, sitting and not being able to do things you want to do when you're older? So we're talking about all things health here on this show. And Dr. Melanie today is going to share her story and why her focus and niche is SIBO, but also we'll discover end of the show, and we're going to do a follow-up podcast on what led her towards being the intuitive doctor and helping people figure out what to eat and how to improve their relationship with food, and her knowledge of the epigenetic nutrition and intuitive way of taking over your health management system. So Dr. Melanie, she has her story, as all practitioners seem to have some experience that led them down this path. So she had her own gut health and weight problems over half of her life. She used her naturopathic expertise and epigenetic intuition to help people understand their bodies and how to live a better life, to take part in their own rescue and receive the precise care that they need. She calls this epigenetics. It's your lifestyle. It's how you live your life. Epigenetic nutrition. Pretty interesting. She was raised in Alaska on a pristine diet and active lifestyle, yet to get her microbiome in balance, it led down to obesity. She discovered raw food, plant-based eating resulted in effortless release of her own weight and inspiration to become a naturopathic doctor. Extensive postgraduate training by the top experts in small intestine bacterial overgrowth, known as SIBO, SIBO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, IMO, and epigenetics led her to acupressure, neuroscience, and biofield therapies due to her own experience with profound effects of grief. And there's a lot of new information over the last few years of grief and trauma and how that affects your health. It has been this process that Dr. Melanie has created this new sense of healing herself and really unleashing her grief from an inside. So unleashing it from hiding it inside. Her passion is expanding knowledge and the term epigenetic intuition. And her purpose is to be the light that guides people to find themselves. Her mission is to stop the never-ending SIBO treatment, the madness, and get results. So we talk about all things SIBO and go down a few rabbit holes and finish up with a little bit on the intuition part that I'm interested in. So we talk about, what is SIBO and methane overgrowth and how that contributes to weight gain and the epigenetic biohacks that she's done. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and just a little more because I think it's just something you might be the one that can learn from her experience and her story. And that's why I like to bring different guests on the show to talk all things health and how you can relate it to the athlete and how athletes, we seem to feel like we're invincible of having any imbalances on the inside when we're actually adding extra stress to our body, especially if you're training for endurance events, overtraining, 2-3 hour workout sessions a day. That's going to throw your stress hormones out the door. Doing, over 45 minutes of cardio. If you're not training for an Ironman or marathon, I would recommend limiting your cardio workouts to 30-45 minutes. It's not really beneficial. It's especially if you're already causing or experiencing a lot of stress in your life, if it's with family, with trauma, with not eating enough is a stress, fasting too much is a stressor, hormone imbalances, gut stress. There's a lot of stuff. Those hidden internal stressors are contributing to our stress beaker. And those external stressors, finances. I know I lost my job pretty much last year with COVID as a personal trainer. Luckily, I was building up my health coaching business on the side, but really it was not working much first half of the year as a lot of people. And so that financial stress and all the other stresses we had in 2020 accumulate with all the internal stressors. So looking at gut health in different perspectives as today's SIBO, I think is a really important part of teaching you to be fit and healthy on the inside out. So let's learn a little bit about SIBO and how to be healthy and Dr. Melanie's story. I will put links in the show notes, but we will have her back on the show in another month. So let me know what you think and we'll add it into the next episode, part 2. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, I have a new guest on the show today to teach us how to be fit and healthy from the inside out. Her name is Dr. Melanie up in LA, not too far away from me in San Diego. How are you today?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm good. I always love meeting new people and talking about their stories, and we're all kind of after the same thing, helping people really be fit and healthy from inside out. And I call it the holistic method, approaching getting healthy for athletes of all levels with all these different stories and modalities and just lifestyle habits and things that we can do, because stress impacts the whole person. And, we're going to talk about SIBO and gut health today and your story. But I think it's so important to share this information and share your stories as yourself and what you do with our listeners, athletes of all levels. I think it's important to share that because some people just don't really know if they're really living their best life. And I think so many people can settle for different odd things happening to them and think that's their new normal and never really think outside the box and search for answers, as we'll talk about today, right? So I appreciate your time, and let's kind of talk about your background and what led you to doing what you're doing today in your world. So take it over.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. So I grew up in Southeast Alaska on a pristine diet and lifestyle, active, cross-country skiing. I mean, the whole 9 yards. But I suffered from childhood obesity, quite frankly. My mom had me at at aerobics classes, and even if not third grade. And so that was really challenging because it was always like, what's wrong with me? And throughout life, and then you had hormones kick in, and that also shuffled the deck. But I was always pursuing health, and I've always pursued it. And I was going to even weight loss clinics, and they would do my labs. I mean, so I was facing it, if that makes sense. And they would run my labs and be like, we don't really see what's wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was actually watching a talk show and they compared these diets, and one of them was a raw food diet. And that just clicked for me in the moment. I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and actually had really great access to many things. In fact, even raw food restaurants, etc. And so I just dove in head first, 100%, and really lost weight very easily. And it just made a lot of sense to me. But there was also a lot of connection to the food and connection to everything that I was doing, that then led me down the pathway of becoming a naturopathic doctor. And in naturopathic medical school, I continued to lose weight pretty much in front of everyone. And it was like this, it was interesting. It was interesting to have the assumptions and the unsolicited advice come through. And quite frankly, it was by way of my mentorship about small intestine bacterial overgrowth, that even though I had lost all of this weight and I was doing amazing, I was feeling amazing. And I thought all these wonderful things were going to happen because I was at my optimal weight, and isn't all of these wonderful things, isn't love going to come into my life, all these things, which didn't happen. Because I also had other things in terms of epigenetics, environment, mold toxins, other things that were affecting my mood, my motivation, because I'd also released quite a bit of weight, which is release of toxins. Yeah. And so within all of that, I then turned to what everybody was saying, and I started doing this heavier fat and heavier, quite frankly, very heavy probiotic and fermented food regime. And I basically gained a lot of the weight back. And that was embarrassing and that just devastating, quite frankly. And it was within that I then realized, and I'd been thankful to get connected to lead researcher at Cedars-Sinai and actually the endocrinologist in a different department, and their work with obesity and diabetes, and also in bariatric surgeries. And when I made this connection that the methane specifically, which are archaea, they're not technically bacteria, they're a subspecies, they can exponentiate calories. So while I was on this 1,200 calorie diet throughout my youth, and, just all of the mental anguish that goes along with that, these particular microbes were exponentiating to around 4,000 to 5,000 calories. Hence the reason why even at every single weight loss clinic I went to and I was doing the diet, they were like, nope, you must be cheating. Oh, you have to be, because this isn't calorically possible. And I understood that. I had that science knowledge. However, it's not until we uncovered this microbe and I addressed the microbe and the reasoning why it's there, key, that the weight now has been like a non-issue, in the sense of like not having these big swings, because there are people, whether you're fit and athletic or not, they can gain 10, 20 pounds very easily. And they just go, oh my gosh, why, what happened? What have I done? And it's like, it's not you, it's likely the bacteria or the microbes.
And that's why I always want people to test and not guess, like do functional lab testing, and also looking at your genetics. What type of labs do you suggest people get started with to kind of identify some hidden internal stressors or causing them to feel not their best and to gain weight when they're doing all the right things, and there's just, can't get their body back and they can't improve their performance or their health, and just kind of general issues with food and digestion and absorption?
Yeah, those all swirl into one, huh? So what I start with, my two primary and importance, and this is actually to get an official diagnosis of small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which I want to emphasize is not a condition, or it's not a syndrome. It's not a doomsday diagnosis. It's, quite frankly, it's just stating what it is. It's bacterial overgrowth. That's it. And so what do we do about it? Why is there, and what do we do about it? So taking those into account, as of October 2020, there is the Trio Smart Breath Test. I know many practitioners who might be offering breath tests, other breath tests, and I just want to emphasize that anything outside of the Trio Smart Breath Test, I am going to then order a Trio Smart Breath Test. Quite frankly, I won't care if you've had any other company done. That's how much I'm going to emphasize it, because it is validated to see the hydrogen, the methane, hydrogen sulfide. It is the only test on the market that is measuring hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide. So technically it's measuring 4 gases if we're going to get into semantics. Okay. Hydrogen is really just a fuel source, quite frankly. That information will be very clear soon. And hydrogen sulfide is what we're really going for on the Trio Smart Breath Test for a diagnosis of small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Now, I mentioned that methane is also on the same test. If methane is positive, that is intestinal methanogen overgrowth, or IMO. So they are very different. If you have methane only, you have methane overgrowth. You do not have SIBO. You have EMO, is what they're calling it now, apparently. And if you have hydrogen and or hydrogen sulfide, you have SIBO. You can have SIBO and EMO if you have hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfide elevated. And here's why that's important. Because hydrogen, I said, is the fuel source. Methane likes 4 hydrogen, CH4. Hydrogen sulfide likes 5. So depending on how many hydrogen you have, I call those the Pac-Man pellets for Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man.
Got it. So maybe if we could explain what SIBO is, if people are just, you hear about it, but they don't really know. So it's small, it stands for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, but maybe just explain a little bit more what that is, if people are just never really knew what it exactly means and what is methane gas, and kind of a little more science behind it.
Okay, so it's an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, and that can come from a multitude of risk factors, and or can be associated with a number of different diseases. That's why I emphasize small intestine bacterial overgrowth is just stating what it is. You might have other concurrent conditions or situations that might be causing that bacterial overgrowth. So one of that can be slow motility of your stomach and or the small intestine. So that's going to take me to the next test, actually, if I may, really quick. If somebody has had a food poisoning or a traveler's diarrhea, which they may or may not remember, or they may or may not say, oh, but my so-and-so didn't have it too, it doesn't matter, because if they've had that risk factor and they take a test that shows that the antibody is elevated, I call that like a skip in the record. So some people have just a mini scratch in the record. You might not even hear it. If the song played, you might not even catch it, okay? But some people have a deeper groove in that record, so much so that the record would skip and they'd have to get up and physically go move the needle. So that's a significant risk factor that's been validated to show this is the reason why you have bacterial overgrowth. So that's the second test that I would Okay, so that's a direct mechanism that's been validated. Now, there's other reasons. For example, if somebody has slow motility, right? I call the small intestine like the factory where all of the products are made, whether it's the nutrients being broken down and being absorbed. This is also where our neurotransmitters or our brain chemicals are being formulated and mixed and churned. And this is our gut brain connection. Now, if there is static or overgrowth, right, or a big hose, another example I'll use is if you have lint in your dryer vent that you never clean out, right, that could start inflammation and or a fire in your house, right? So we need to be able to know if I have an overgrowth or an overabundance in this area, that can cause inflammation. That can then lead to leaky gut, or it's like going to get raw and rub up against that lining. And that's going to cause what's technically called intestinal permeability, which allows things through that shouldn't go through. And those can go into our bloodstream and affect our mood, our health, our hormones, our fertility, our, sexual function, all of that. And if we don't have this movement happening, which is called the migrating motor complex, this cleaning wave that happens, then things are going to continue to get stuck. And the way that we look to see if our cleaning wave is working goes back to the needle and the record. Mm-hmm. That's the blood test.
And then kind of going to why, why do people have this happen, or how do people get SIBO? We're talking about slow motility, but in nutritional therapy, we always go backwards and start with how you're eating, why you're eating, when you're eating. But what are some signs and symptoms of SIBO, as well as, why do people get it? And then signs.
Well, we just described why people get it. So it's definitively a food poisoning. 98% valid certainty. Okay. So if you've been diagnosed with IBS, 80% of people have SIBO. So they really need to have this blood test done to find out how deep of a groove in the record. Mm-hmm. That's going to tell me so much information. And let me tell you, there's been the people who go, I don't remember a food poisoning. That's never happened to me. And the blood test has come back with the highest antibodies I've seen. And that has determined the treatment course. Because if somebody has high antibodies, the type of where they have to move and get up and move the needle, they're going to have more, quote, rules and guidelines to follow, spacing their meals, etc. But back to your question, it's going to be an array of symptoms. Quite frankly, there's many things that you could put into the SIBO bucket. Yeah. That's my impression. The more specific ones that we probably see people for, and it's capital letters, bloating. I see bloating is the biggest, most Instagrammable. I see men, women describing their, quote, pregnancy bellies. That's what's the most uncomfortable for most people, because they're like, what is this? I am doing everything right. And that's the most annoying. Then secondarily, I almost have to pull it out of them. What's your bowel function? Because they've probably had that for so long. They're just like, I'm so used to constipation. I'm so this for like, I've always had diarrhea. It's like, well, actually that's not normal. Mm-hmm. And then the second or third one that I think is probably, I don't see as often, but people are, they're embarrassed by it. It's flatulence, and it can be extreme foul gas where they just don't even, they're embarrassed to really leave. I even have a patient who made 3 attempts to even get on an airplane to come and see me once, because it was that bad. And that's a lot for people to pull themselves out and be like, look, this is how bad my flatulence is.
So if people are going to see, first off, probably they'll go see their regular doctor, traditional medicine. Is there any blood chemistry labs that the doctor will give that people can start to see kind of red flags that they need to investigate deeper with more of a specialist and more functional medicine, naturopathic treatment? Because I know a lot of people just go to the doctor and they say everything's normal, you're fine, but maybe there's some markers that are high or low that they could go, maybe I need to go get some more help somewhere else.
Unfortunately, not in the conventional algorithmic system, I'll say. Unless you're a female and you are complaining of bloating, and majority of people should then be offered an ultrasound, an abdominal ultrasound. That is the first thing in the algorithm. And quite frankly, I don't always see that. I often sometimes have to send the person for a workup about endometriosis or fibroids and, and say, please emphasize your GI complaints to the gynecologist. But general blood work, your average healthy person going in for labs, if we're talking about functional labs, so going, okay, that's a different answer.
Yeah.
Then 100%, I hope so many people are getting sex hormone binding globulin. That will give me, like, of all the labs, stool tests, everything, I want to know what's your SHBG or sex hormone binding globulin level. And that's probably the one that stands out to me. You can have your inflammatory CRP marker. I mean, again, what might be elevated, which I see often, is B12 levels. So whether the person is taking B12 or not, it might be like extremely high. And that's an indicator of bacterial overgrowth because bacteria make B12. And so they'll be told to go off of their B12 or, so it's like, well, actually there's something to that. And again, depending on somebody's history, I'm always looking for eosinophils. That's more specific to my thinking. I'm also looking at people's calcium levels.
Yeah, because I think so many people probably, go to their doctor first, and then it takes them to feeling really bad and, wasting a lot of time trying to figure out what's wrong with them and why I have this bloating and gas and these issues that you're talking about. But then they go to their doctor first and they'll just say, here's a medication. And so it's just like how we can teach people that let's not, maybe you need to go find a specialist or naturopath, and when they should start to look at more a functional medicine specialist, as yourself, a naturopath doctor, to look at that. It's just hard so many people just go to their doctor for everything and just think, okay, that's what I have to deal with the rest of my life. That's my new normal, is having these issues, and never really realize that there is a solution and you can go find someone that can help you. It's just always frustrating to me. Like, you can get help.
No, I mean, especially when you've been that person, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, and they'll tell you a lot of things. That's the unfortunate thing about irritable bowel syndrome. Even getting that diagnosis is extremely costly and takes years to get, which is why this blood test is now validating things faster. I just think that let's quite frankly, let's just be straight. If you're going to your insurance base, and I am not against this, with all due professional courtesy and respect, we need all systems of healthcare. Okay. But that's more, in my mind, sick care. I go there when I'm sick. I do not go there for my healthcare. So healthcare, right? So we go to people to say, is there something really wrong with me? In fact, I think many of us in functional medicine, natural medicine, we appreciate when somebody has been fully worked up, so that we have that, okay, there is, the boxes have been checked, and now we can really dive into more of alternatives, if that's the word to use. But I would say give it 1 or 2, maybe 3 shots within your insurance-based system. And after that, like if they've given you the blood work, generalized blood work, if you go to a next level of a procedure, usually after the 3rd place, if you haven't been referred to a specialist, you're probably not going to be. And so that's maybe when you want to either have complementary specialty assistance in natural or functional medicine, or just full on transfer your care to that form of medicine.
Yeah, so I just find it interesting that so many people, especially athletes, and this happened to me too. It's like, okay, I'm exercising, I'm fasting, I'm eating all the right foods you think are good for you, and you're still gaining weight. And so really teaching people there's different reasons that you could not be able to lose weight, or that you continue gaining weight even if you're active and doing all these right things. But you touched on it a little bit already, that the methane overgrowth can contribute to weight gain. And can you explain a little bit more about that, so people might listen and go, oh, that's me.
That was the me eating 1,200 calories. I was 13, 16, whatever age that I've ever been, following the restricted caloric diet, right, to lose weight, calories in, calories out. And why was I gaining 3 pounds a week? And it's because if we really want to go, these are deep studies. Okay. Like if somebody's going to read about this, they're going to have to go into PubMed and read about this and read about how this researcher looked at bariatric surgery patients, and those with positive methane lost a third of their weight. So imagine that. Imagine going, and I actually know someone that has had bariatric surgery and has not lost any weight. And I'm like, oh, I think they have methane, So if we think back long ago, this is an ancient microbe. When we had food, we wanted to hang on to those calories. So let's go back to hunter-gatherer time where methane was our friend. In industrialized, environmentally toxic new world, methane is not our friend. When we have so much access to kind of lazy eating, we can be pristine about our eating, but do we really need to eat 3 times a day? Do we really, there's so many things that we've just gotten programmed to do, and or I have the money to, so therefore I should.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So those are things we really want to consider. Now, the next level of this, if methane isn't a factor or methane is a factor, then the next biggest piece that I look at is that methane loves saturated fat. So how many diets do we see are inundated with saturated fat? And it's the whole, is bad, is good, and it depends on what year you lived in or what era you're living in. And my component is, I'm like, it's not so great. And I do consider blood type, and I do consider, I take many things into account based on the individual. The biggest thing here is about fat and animal protein. These things are acidic. They are acid producing in our body. And one of the things that I definitively see in SIBO are people are acidic. They are over acidic. I have tested over 100 stomachs. 5 humans had, quote, low stomach acid out of 100, 5 technically. And guess what? When they were given betaine HCl, it changed their life quickly. Not kind of, sort of, I feel it maybe kind of this week. No, like that. I had a woman describe to me her bloating was reduced by 90% within 72 hours. I've seen a person who is 6'1", 135 pounds when they came to me, gained 25 pounds in 8 weeks, and asking me if they can have a PB&J sandwich. Gluten too, doctor, please. Hell yeah. Because it was nostalgic for them. They're a music producer. They went from taking bone broth on airplanes and not being able to eat with anybody or canceling dinner parties, etc., to ordering whatever they wanted. They're like, I'm a foodie now. I look forward to going to wherever to eat whatever I want. Now, do they have gluten every single day? No. But when in Rome, they might. Or when that chef is, oh yeah, I'm going to eat, I want to have that. So within this, I found epigenetics were essential, especially for myself. I could not do fats. And it wasn't until, or a certain amount of fat just made my constipation worse. And then I found out that epigenetically, I have a challenge with making bile. Well, the bacteria, they love to what we call deconjugate our bile. So basically what that means is they'll take the lock out of the key out of the lock, and they'll just be like, neener, you can't unlock this. And when they do that, when they deconjugate our bile, which bile is antimicrobial, so it's a natural antibiotic, it's a natural cleaning mechanism for our body, but it also recycles our hormones. And so we need that bile, that's our friend, and it's how our stool is going to look too. So bile is making the color of our stool, let's say. So it's not that we can gauge our stool by any means, but sometimes we can. Sometimes people have extremely light colored stool or extremely more darker colored or tarry, kind of leaves a residue when you flush. That's giving me information about this mechanism. So when I found out that I have a decreased ability to make adequate bile, I then, like you said, took the steps backwards to say, okay, well, what makes bile? How do I make bile? Instead of just maybe necessarily taking bile or replacing what my body needs, which I may do on occasion, I'll also go back upstream and say, what is bile made of? Well, bile is made 70% of phosphatidylcholine. So I then know, okay, well, my body probably needs some help in the factory line here. Why don't I give myself some more phosphatidylcholine? It's not a bad thing. It's going to give me these other benefits for cellular membrane, for brain health, etc. And it was very interesting because I went from taking X amount of bile, which was like the wonder treatment for me and for many other people, to I'll say, okay, once you get up to a certain level of bile, that's working for the constipation. And then all of a sudden that amount of bile will start to create the diarrhea. So that's bile acid diarrhea. And we'll then back it off to the point where then we're replacing it with phosphatidylcholine. So that's telling me, okay, your body needed the bile for a certain period of time, but as you gave it its foundation of the supply that it needed, it no longer needs you to replace it because you've actually supported it with what it really needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're stimulating the body, kind of getting it to work at its own optimal level and finding that homeostasis, that Goldilocks effect. How much does your body need to get back into balance and restore its health by finding the right amount? Kind of the pulse method Dr. Lynch talks about, yes. Like take it up, take it down, and when to have something and not do it. You don't always need it every day for the rest of your life, but just the right amount.
Exactly. And I'll play with it, right? I'll be like, do I need phosphate? Because while phosphatidylcholine can be great for other reasons, right? Somebody else who has adequate bile production and they're taking it for brain health, right? They might get loose stool. So again, like you say, it's finding that balance and working with somebody who takes these factors into account.
And that just reinforces that there isn't one diet for everyone, and we're so bio-individual and biochemical differences. And I think, people are always trying to follow what someone shows on Instagram or Facebook, social media, what is their food plan to eat to lose weight. And it's not always the same macronutrients, and it's going to be individualized when you work with someone as yourself. But what epigenetics, if people do genetics, and epigenetics is the lifestyle with the genetics, talk a little bit what you do with that to help your clients, your patients.
Yeah, well, so I'm very, very well versed. In fact, I just glanced at, since you mentioned Dr. Ben Lynch, the Strategene report. I have his pathway planner on my wall. It's constantly going on in my head. If I talk to anybody in a session, I'm reviewing their Strategene report because, like I say, it's just like this biochemistry is like a constellation in my mind, because whatever they're telling me is clearly influencing the system. It's a dynamic system, right? So he provides information that will give me the scientific evidence of things that will put the accelerator or the brake on in certain enzymes or pathways. But then I also have to take the human into account. And that's why I have a 6-month program, because it enables me to have that opportunity to get to know someone. We often get results very quickly on resolving the SIBO within 2 to 6 weeks often. It's now how do we keep it away and at bay? How do you recognize your cycles and what is influencing why you got the SIBO in the first place? What are these what's the rest of the spider web, perhaps? And it's within that time frame that we're then looking at, okay, I've gotten to know them. They have some events coming up. They have, right? Maybe like you just mentioned, they have a tendency to have a personality to compare-itis or have some FOMO or some, right? There might be some limiting beliefs that are also part of, when the CDC is referring to epigenetics as the behavioral and environmental effects that, affect the way our genes work, then that's also going to be our personality, et cetera. So oftentimes, right, as a coach, we have to get to know somebody, but also meet them where they are. Mm-hmm. So I often say, after having been a raw Buddhist and a this and a that, and growing up with commercial fishing, as an influence in my life, I'll take everything. I say, stack everything that you loved, that raw food recipe, that salmon dish, and then throw it all up in the air, and then pick up the things that you just absolutely cannot do without, right? I love dolma. There's just certain things that are my loves or are in season. And then go with that, because when you really connect with what you love and what resonates with you, you'd be surprised what can release off of your body just by saying, okay, I'm going to prepare this food with love and joy, and not, oh no, is this going to make me bloated and damn the broccoli? It can just be like, yay, this is going to be an experience. I'm going to see, this might make me a little bloated, but hey, that'll give me information about what's going on in my body.
Mm-hmm. That's why I like sometimes just to track. I know Nutritional Therapy, we have this NutriQ website program. I'll give a link to people and they can track their food for just 3 days even, and say it has symptoms and has a stool chart on there, and they can really see, pay attention, because so many people I find don't know how they feel when they eat foods. I'm like, I was asked, and look at metabolic typing chart, how do you feel after you eat? Do you feel this way or that way? Because a lot of people are like, I don't know. And then they don't really ever pay attention how food makes them feel. So it's always interesting to ask those questions and get people to start paying attention finally, like, oh, that was that food, and how you can really figure it out by investigating or going a little more into individual foods itself.
Oh, absolutely. And what I hear in there is this, I think the reason being people are either, not to say that they're not able to tune in, they might not, quote, have time, right? Like we're so inundated with what I call the sympathetic dominance.
Yeah.
So when you ask them a parasympathetic task or question, they're just like, well, wait a minute, what? Because as soon as I finished eating, or maybe even I was eating while I was multitasking, or while I was even thinking about my training, right? Because we know the power of how we can be training in our minds, running that marathon in our mind. So if you're running your marathon in your mind versus eating when we should be eating, what do you think your body's going to, it's going to get sluggish. So I really like to block, even put my phone on airplane mode, close your eyes, even if you have to, and savor that food and just be like, wow, get into your foodiness, get into the savor.
Yeah, and that's
food hygiene, right?
It is. That's why I was thinking it's what we eat, but how, when, and why. And getting people to take 3 deep breaths in and out, and kind of shift to that parasympathetic state before we just start eating and rushing, and that rushing syndrome, and really pause and reset, and then take a bite and eat slowly. Like I would say, as if you're in Europe, or if I'm in Italy and you're having this nice, long, leisurely lunch. But I think so much of our fast-paced lifestyle, until the past year, maybe people maybe paid attention more the past year because their life was different, but how important it is to stop and eat, and not eat while you're doing 20 things, or driving your car, or at your computer, and doing so many things that think is just normal now.
Or we think we're saving time, right? I've been guilty of it. I'm like, I need to eat this while I check this email because I have to respond. And all of a sudden, and like I said, and I'll go, oh my goodness. Or I can close this laptop. I can take the 3 minutes to finish this protein bar, right? Like I can really savor it. And guess what? I will really enjoy this. I'll digest it better. And I might actually respond better in this email.
So true.
Whereas before I would have been stressed and eating, and and who knows what I maybe would have typed.
I know. That's what I used to do. That's what my story in my book I wrote. Life is not a race, it is a journey. And I've had, to readjust how I live life each day, because I was just always going from 4:30 to in the morning till 8:00 at night, just like never stopping to really pause and have a little break in between the day. So next question is kind of what you're already starting talking about, but the biohacks, so to speak, lifestyle changes. We're just talking about that now, like epigenetics is lifestyle and the genetics, and the lifestyle hacks. Do you look at people's genetics and looking at strategy and then figure out what lifestyle habits, instead of, we always talk about supplementation, what to stimulate and support the body, but so much of it is our lifestyle habits. Because I feel like I can't really help someone with 10, 20 supplements and try to give them this protocol, but they're still living life as a race, because you have to work on, what we said, how you're eating, when you're eating, all this, parasympathetic stop and reset stuff. So what do you find works great for your clients?
Oh, I love that. Because I grew up in Alaska in a commercial fishing family where it's like, what I say is, you don't just patch the hole, right? You fix the boat. You take it out of the water and you fix the hole. You don't just keep patching it up and thinking you're going to make it across the water. And I'm a minimalist when it comes to supplements, because I think sometimes my patients get a little annoyed because I'll be like, what is that doing for you? What do you feel? What is it, like you're saying about food? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, I'm kind of going for you recognizing, I call this dimmer switch, right? Because I'm that tuned into their epigenetics. And then sometimes I'll tell them, I'll give an example of vitamin D. Vitamin D could be I call it the shrug your shoulders, you might not notice. But if you have really low levels, like myself, my levels were down to a 4. And I know that vitamin D is the doorbell into the cellular level of the thyroid. And that's why I had hypothyroid. And so once I got my vitamin D levels up, so I have some people that I'll be like, oh, guess what? You might actually, I've had this happen. I gave somebody vitamin A and vitamin D. Like I say, that rings the doorbell at the cellular level to let thyroid in. And just by giving them those 2 fat soluble hormone vitamins, it was as if I had given them hormone. And I pulled back that prescription, actually, because that would have been too much for them. That was a really great example for myself. And oftentimes doctors will just kind of just like, well, they have to take this and this and this. And again, I'll do professional courtesy and respect, but sometimes that's even their financial agenda. There, I said it. Okay. Yeah. They're like, they need this and this and this because that's how it is. And everybody needs to be on a probiotic. I've had them come up to me at happy hours where they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, are they on a probiotic? And they're like, well, what do you do to replace that $70? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, no. Okay, you go find a replacement for that income because that's not how I practice, but that's okay. All right. And some people really want that replacement. Like you say, they actually are attached to their supplements. So I really pull back because I want to be able to see less is more. Not only that, I am resetting the stomach. Always resetting the stomach is, I'll call chapter 1 is resetting the stomach, so that when we go shopping in their lovely medicinary of supplements they already have, I'm able to bring them back in and say, okay, do you really notice this difference? Yes or no? We'll either run through the product or we might just drop it off, because I'd rather them spend the money on, like you're saying, the more lifestyle, upgrading their air filters, buying more plants, getting a shower filter. The things, quite frankly, where do we spend a whole hell of a lot of time is our bed. Is your bed non-toxic? Your bedding, your sleep. And I'm not about this. I'm referring to the term ortho, that we have orthorexia, and I'm now calling it orthobiohackia, because I'm like, oh my gosh, if you're trying to get better sleep, why are you watching your monitor and like, kind of over analyzing yourself? Like, let's just, there are other ways that it's great information. Trust me, the scientist in me finds it fascinating, but I find sometimes the average person does not need to be inundated with more sympathetic information for them to then process. So, yeah, I hope that I've answered the question in the sense that for me, less is more. I don't recommend probiotics. You can get your probiotics in your prebiotics in food. And that's just oral probiotics. Now, do I recommend probiotics topically or intravaginal? Sure, if the case requires that. But oftentimes, right, we do not need, and I also have an opinion on this, that they're not well regulated. And often these companies are looking at the consumer to be the guinea pig, like, what is the response here? And so that's up to the individual. If they're into that, if they want to be part of research, R&D, go for it.
Yeah, like the vaccine.
But at the same time, if you've been taking this, I just had this happen in a Zoom meeting where I was expressing this to somebody who understood why I say no probiotics. And inevitably in the chat, you'll get multiple people, but everybody tells, and I'm like, that's my point. You were told to take a probiotic, but how's that going for you?
Well, what if those people, I think a lot of people go for that because they'd rather not eat the foods that they need to feed their microbiome. They rather take a pill, is what I get from people. Like, well, I don't want to eat all that. Is there a pill for that? They don't want to eat good food.
And then that's going to be part of their story, right? It's just like, I don't want to look at my environment. I don't want to turn off the Wi-Fi. That I love my smart home. What does that have to do with anything? Okay.
Yeah. Meet the client where they're at.
Okay.
Here's what we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what something, I think people that are into biohacking, I agree that less is more, and trying to find more lifestyle habits and not another app on my floor. And like, I started wearing an Oura ring, and I love that information I can get, but I don't want to have more stuff with apps that I have to log into, or devices. And just, I think there's so much naturally we can do without having to buy some other device or toy and have all that stuff. It's like, what about just some nasal breathing and making your room dark and cold, and there's things that we can do to improve our sleep and improve digestion. I think there's a lot of things that are just what we did years ago that you didn't have all that stuff available.
Right. Or I was also thinking about, because I'll talk to my people of like I'm a coach to athlete relationship, in the sense that I'm like, you know yourself so well. And I know what I know, right, from my perspective, but you know yourself the best, so that I can help coach you in your natural talents and abilities. And I just think back to my undergrad in kinesiology, where we often looked at what does the athlete tell us? And then we would go and shift the golf swing, you know, or the this or the equipment based on it, because we were listening to their intuition of like, why were they drawn to that? Why did they eat that? Like, what is going on in their internal systems to then see the results that they're getting, right? And some of these top athletes, they often tell us what works for them, you see. And then all of a sudden we put on these parameters, which is great. Again, they might be fantastic for tracking and seeing changes. But I also will always go back to the power of the mind. And when there's multiple examples of showing, when you run that race, or you, whatever you're training for in your mind, and you can be in a very calm and soothing place on that, the evidence has really shown that that can improve your training significantly. So I just find that interesting. That doesn't require a supplement or an app or even extensive strenuous workouts.
Have you studied the vagal tone, the vagal nerve, and how to stimulate that with the gut-brain connection help people at all? Have you looked into that?
Yes, I'm very aware. I have yeah. I mean, yeah.
Well, I just wonder, because I'm reading the book about vagal, like brain toxicity and gut health, and just reading about how, you know, we can strengthen the vagal nerve to help improve heart rate variability and help so many different things, and reading about vagal nerve toxicity and how that impacts digestion and all these like SIBO and bacteria, overgrowth, but toxicity and everything in our body. But I just wonder if you ever tie that into your program, or using essential oils or anything.
No, I mean, I find it interesting. I respect, and for me, what it is I call it the zoom in and zoom out. We can zoom in all the way down to the mitochondrial level. Yay, I love that. But I got to zoom out and get the panoramic view of like, what am I really doing here? What are we, I've just seen people gargle themselves silly, you know, or I'm just like, okay, this vagal tone, but what are they eating? Or what is their environment? What is their workplace life? What is their marriage like? Like, you see, so it's this, all of these are spokes on a wheel, but where is the wheel going and who's driving it?
So true. And I know as FDM practitioners, we talk, you know, Reed Davis, founder, created the DRESS for health success protocol. That's D is diet, rest is our exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. And just to be healthy, you know, it's not supplements, just a minor part of it, but working on all these lifestyle habits are what you have to actually work on first. And that's harder for people. And so many people just want to take the supplement. And I learned that the hard way for, I think, until last year. I finally changed my life, forced to work at home and not being out the door at 5 a.m. and just being busy all the time. But really working on getting healthy by working on my relationships with people and working on all that, you know, you're talking about the external stressors that we don't really realize that are stressors until we're forced to slow down. Thanks to COVID, it really helped me actually get healthy last year. That, oh, this is what happiness is. I'm so used to being in overdrive every day. And now we're all forced to slow down and reflect in our life and find joy and happiness in different ways. That's like, oh, I feel better now. And I didn't have to take 20 different supplements. I changed. So that's great.
Oh, I love that. And also like loving yourself, right? And forgiving yourself and not having this comparitis or FOMO or, you know, comparing your chapter 1 to somebody else's 20 and, you know, and just, or comparing somebody else's meal that they're having to whatever you're craving in that moment. Heaven forbid you use the word crave according to certain people. Like, like it's just like, hey, you know what? I have been the zombie that's walked over to a grocery store and bought 52 cents worth of gummy bears. I didn't know why. I was like, what am I doing? You know, there was this mind piece that's like, you're blah, 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 blah. But I was like, my body was like, this is happening. And I never felt better. And it like lifted me out of the funk I was in. I had better bowel function the next day. But like the logical mind was like, this is sugar, this is coloring and all these other things. But for some reason, that was exactly what I needed in that moment. So we also have to listen to that too.
Do you do, my sister-in-law always does a ask your body what it wants thing. And, you know, if I tilt this way, it means yes. If I tilt that, it's right. No. Or do you do any of the?
I mean, that's definitely out there, and even using a pendulum. I am even being trained right now in some higher energy work where I don't really have like, that's, if I'm saying that's like a 3D example of me asking my body, I can now just have a higher knowingness. I've been there, I've been through all of those phases, but it's almost like, yeah, we'll call this willpower or craving, when really sometimes, no, that's exactly what my body needs. Yeah. Whether it's a sugar-free cookie or, you know what I'm saying, or whatever that might be deemed under the category of bad or sugar, because I do it so rarely, right? If it calls to me, I don't see that as, oh, that's candida or yeast, or that's these evil things coming after you. No, it actually might be my microbes going, hey, a little sugar, please, and enjoy it and have a fabulous time eating it.
It doesn't mean you have candida overgrowth or something, or exactly. Saying that's what my microbes, and that's what we're feeding what our microbiome needs to stay healthy and energized and make us feel our best selves, is really looking at that balance in there and figuring out what they need to produce what we need to live and thrive.
Right, because there's more of them than of us. I've even gotten, if we're going to get a little woo here, that I think they have their own frequency. So oftentimes, right, I'm like, hey, how can I adjust my frequency to match, or just to even release the challenges? Because I know I've been there. It's happened to me where you're just like, you're so frustrated, not this bloating again. But the more you can really look at it as an opportunity, look at it as a gift that your body is giving you, look into your intuitive knowingness that you need help, meaning you need a coach. Like, let's not, oftentimes a lot of the people who are probably listening are type A, you know, they're doers, they know what they're doing, and they're really darn good at it. Well, guess what? There's other ones of us that you want to hire to do the things that you're like, I'm done doing the self-research. You've done so much of it that it helps us, right? When you have that person, right, who's done a lot, it's like we can fine tune the knobs a bit faster and easier and get those results. Yet if you continue to seek and go down the rabbit hole after rabbit hole, that can put you further into like this broad term of adrenal. Yeah. Dot.
Yeah, I know. That's what I would say. Adrenal exhaustion is what I struggled with in 2013. Like, it's just air quotes around that because it's not that, but that's what we used to call it. And just kind of that catch-all phrase to just total internal metabolic chaos, we say in FDN. It's just a little bit of everything accumulates and adds havoc to all systems of your body, but you don't know exactly what it is until you start investigating and then putting those missing pieces of the puzzle together to help restore the whole you. I think it is so much of what you're saying is, I love it's just the intuitive part and paying attention to your body and learning to feel what you feel and being aware of that experience. And you said loving yourself is part of that. You know, I would say self-care is self-love. If you're really trying to optimize your health and be healthy and build your immune system, it isn't taking, you know, so much of vitamin C and zinc and vitamin D every day, but it's also these lifestyle habits that you're explaining is so essential to health.
Yeah. Or like your book, The Journey, right? It's like, we see that in entrepreneurship. It's never a straight line. It's this total, just interesting journey. That's part of being the human form. And if we can look at it as like, that's how it is now. Like, I used to be the person, I'll say it, that if you would go, I don't want to sit next to her on the airplane. And I know what that vibration feels like, but you know what? I'm now grateful that I know what that's like for other people who then I can see that are then treated that way just because they look a certain way. And so it's like, that was part of my journey to be in that body form. It was also part of my journey to be a size 2.0 and not be very healthy, mentally healthy and have things spin out there too. And just finding the right balance and loving ourselves where we are. And then it just naturally happens, where it's just like, oh, okay, wow, by forgiving myself, by loving myself, by just listening to whatever it is that I feel that I want and need, and not having some monitor going, you can't eat that, it's not gluten-free, or, we call it the panel in our head. No, connect to self.
I love that. So we're out of time, but I just love to, we'll have to schedule another show to go into that stuff. I think is so important, especially for type A, AAA athletes that are, high performing, driven, ambitious individuals trying to do all the right things to get their body and vibrant self back, that it is looking at, your why and digging into what you're saying, that vibration and learning that intuitive part. I think there's a lot there that you're just throwing out there the last little bit here that I think a lot of athletes of any level, but just I call it the aging athlete, how they really are looking to live their best life and be their best self every day. And as I'm turning 50 this fall, that I keep saying I'm trying to live my best second half of my life as my best life and not just the first half. But now it's like, now I can thrive and really live life to the fullest because you have more opportunity to. And I think it's important to look at those little things, if it's woo to people or not. It's just, it makes sense. And I think it speaks to me what you're saying, how important it is to have that self work and work on your mindset is important.
Yes, lovely.
So how do people find you and learn more about your coaching and programs and services?
Their Intuitive Edge Doctor is my website. More information there and an opportunity to apply for my one-on-one program. If somebody Googles me, they'll also find SIBO solution singular.com. That also will lead you into my program, but a little more information about SIBO and my background there.
Good. Well, great stuff. Thank you for sharing your story and your journey and kind of how you're going from SIBO into more of that intuitive coaching. I think it's a good way to tie in and to have people really learn how to thrive in life, because vitality and health is there's so much more to it. So I appreciate that. So thank you
so much for having me.
Yeah, anytime.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.